the lace of the wedding dress scratched against my collarbone. A harsh, stinging reminder of how much I didn't belong in this world. I stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror of the bride's dressing room, pulling at the stiff fabric. Against the stark, bleached white of the expensive gown, my deep brown skin looked rich and radiant. A striking contrast that I had spent the last 3 years trying to make people appreciate. But in the eyes of the family I was marrying into, my beauty didn't matter. My heritage didn't matter. To them, I was just an outsider. An orphan girl from America who had come to Seoul to start over, working 2 grueling jobs just to chip away at the crushing debts my late father had left behind. For 3 long years, Ji-hoon's upper-class family made sure I knew exactly where I stood on their social ladder. His mother never missed an opportunity to drop a passive-aggressive comment. "She's quite exotic," she would whisper loudly to her wealthy friends at dinner parties, her eyes scanning my afro-textured hair and my curves with blatant disapproval. But of course, a girl who spends 80 hours a week pouring coffee and balancing accounting ledgers doesn't really have the time to learn proper Korean etiquette, does she? I tolerated the sneers. I swallowed my pride every single time they made me feel small. I worked myself to the bone, getting up at dawn to manage a local cafe and staying up past midnight doing freelance bookkeeping, all while trying to plan a wedding on a shoestring budget. I endured it because I loved Ji-hoon, and because I naively believed that love could conquer the deep-seated prejudices of Seoul's elite. I just wanted to be enough for someone. After losing my parents, I was desperately searching for a place to belong, a family to call my own. I told myself every insult was just a hurdle I had to clear to reach happiness. Now, the day had finally arrived. I stood alone in the dressing room of the historic Grand Chapel. The silence in the room was heavy, almost suffocating. I checked my phone for the 20th time. The ceremony was scheduled to begin an hour ago. A cold dread began to settle deep in my stomach, spreading through my veins like ice water. I walked to the heavy oak doors of the dressing room and cracked them open, peering out into the main sanctuary. The cavernous church was terrifyingly still. The rows of polished wooden pews, which should have been filled with Ji-hoon's family, his business associates, and the few friends I had managed to invite, sat entirely empty. The elaborate floral arrangements of white roses looked like funeral decorations in the dim, filtered light of the stained glass windows. My breath caught in my throat. Where was everyone? Where was the priest? Where was Ji-hoon? Suddenly, the screen of my phone lit up, vibrating violently against my palm. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw Ji-hoon's name. I swiped the screen with a trembling thumb, expecting an explanation, a frantic apology about a car accident, or a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, the text message read, "I'm sorry, Olivia. A man approached me this morning with an offer I couldn't refuse. $10 million is life-changing. You aren't. Don't look for me. I'm already leaving the country." The words blurred before my eyes. I read them again and again. Each syllable felt like a physical blow to my chest, knocking the air right out of my lungs. $10 million. My fiancé, the man I had sacrificed my health, my time, and my dignity for, had put a price tag on my heart. To him, my entire existence, our 3 years together, and the future we promised to build were worth less than a bank transfer. I wasn't just rejected, I was traded away like a cheap commodity. The humiliation came in a sudden, violent wave, hot and suffocating. The room spun around me. My knees buckled beneath the weight of the heavy satin skirt, and I collapsed onto the cold marble steps of the altar. The pristine white fabric of my dress pooled around me on the dusty floor, ruined, just like my life. I buried my face in my hands, and a raw, ragged sob tore from my throat. The sound echoed painfully off the high vaulted ceilings of the empty church. There was no one here to comfort me. No bridesmaid to hold my hand. No family to shield me from the shame. I was completely, utterly alone. The crushing weight of a lifetime of being overlooked, of being judged because I was poor, and of being betrayed by the one person I trusted explicitly, converged on me all at once. I wept for my father. I wept for my stolen dignity, and I wept for the realization that no matter how hard I fought, I was still entirely invisible to the world. The echo of my own sobbing was the only sound in the cavernous chapel, a desperate, hollow rhythm that made the empty pews feel even more mocking. I kept my face buried in my hands, wishing the cold marble floor would open up and swallow me whole. The scent of the expensive white roses filled the air, now smelling sickeningly sweet, like a beautiful lie wrapped in satin. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church groaned open. The sound was sharp, slicing through the heavy silence of my despair. I didn't move. I assumed it was a church custodian coming to tell me my time was up, or perhaps a lingering member of Ji-hoon's family coming to deliver one final, cruel remark about the abandoned black bride. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the sting of more pity, or worse, their triumphant laughter. But the footsteps that followed weren't hurried or hesitant. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy, carrying an undeniable weight that seemed to shift the very air pressure in the room. The rhythmic click-thud of expensive leather shoes against the stone floor echoed with an almost terrifying confidence. It wasn't the sound of someone sneaking into a sanctuary. It was the sound of someone who owned it. "White suits you," a voice suddenly broke through the gloom. "But tears do not." The voice was a deep, rich baritone, smooth as velvet, but laced with an underlying gravel that commanded instant obedience. It was fluent English, accented with the distinct, elegant cadence of high society soul. My breath hitched. I slowly lowered my trembling hands from my face and looked up through a blurry veil of tears. Standing at the base of the altar steps was a man who looked like he had been sculpted from midnight and shadows. He was breathtakingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, a jawline that could cut glass, and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me, reading every hidden ache in my soul. His jet black hair was styled perfectly, and he wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit that screamed immeasurable wealth. Behind him, standing at a respectful distance near the entrance, were two towering figures in matching black suits, their hands crossed in front of them, eyes scanning the empty church like hawks. This was Kong Dae. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew of him. Anyone who lived in Seoul, even an expat working 2 jobs like me, had heard the whispers. He was the elusive, brilliant billionaire tycoon who sat at the head of the Kong Corporation by day. But by night, the rumors whispered a much darker truth. He was the ruthless, feared head of the most powerful syndicate in the Korean underworld. He was a man who moved mountains with a flick of his wrist, a predator in a world of sheep. But as I stared at him, terrified and broken, he didn't look at me with the cold, calculative gaze of a businessman or the menacing aura of a mafia boss. His eyes held no judgment for the messy afro-textured hair spilling out of my veil, or the dark tear tracks ruining the makeup on my brown skin. He didn't look at me with the sickening pity I had come to expect from the world. He stepped past the scattered floral arrangements, dismissing the grandeur of the church as if it were nothing. He approached the altar steps, and instead of towering over me to display his immense power, he did something that shocked me to my core. He knelt, right there on the dusty, cold marble, ruining the fabric of a suit that probably cost more than I made in a year. Kong Dae brought himself down to my level. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a pristine silk handkerchief, extending it toward me with a steady, patient hand. I didn't take it right away. I scrambled back slightly, my heavy wedding skirt bunching around my thighs. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice cracked and raw from crying. "If you're here to laugh, or if Ji-hoon sent you to give me some final insult, you can leave. I've had enough." Kong Dae didn't flinch at my defensiveness. His hand remained perfectly still, holding the silk out to me. A ghost of a sad smile touched the corner of his lips, softening the harsh, masculine lines of his face. "I was not sent by the coward who fled," Kong Dae said softly, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart stutter. "And I would never laugh at strength, Olivia." Hearing my name roll off his tongue in that deep, resonant voice sent a strange shiver down my spine. How did he know who I was? Why was he here? Then why are you here? I whispered, finally reaching out with a trembling hand to take the handkerchief. The silk was warm, carrying a faint, intoxicating scent of cedarwood and expensive cologne. I dabbed at my eyes, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "Because everyone else in this city is blind," Kongdae replied calmly, his voice dropping an octave, becoming an intimate warmth in the freezing, cavernous church. He stood up slowly, offering me his hand to help me up, but he didn't force me. He waited for my permission. They look at you and see someone who doesn't belong. They see someone they can push aside because you walk this path alone. But I see differently. He looked around the empty, grand church, his expression hardening into something dangerous and lethal for a split second. Before he looked back down at me, his gaze softening once more. "He is a fool," Kongdae murmured, referring to Ji-hoon. He chose a pile of paper over a diamond. "His loss is not a reflection of your worth, Olivia. It is a reflection of his poverty of spirit." He didn't boast about his billions. He didn't mention his status, his cars, or the men standing guard at the door. He didn't try to sweep me off my feet with grand, empty promises of revenge or rescue. In that moment, his vast power wasn't a weapon he used to intimidate me. It was a shield he was quietly placing around me. For the first time in 3 long, agonizing years in this city, I wasn't the invisible black girl working herself to death for crumbs of acceptance. I wasn't the financial burden or the social embarrassment. To this powerful, dangerous stranger, I was seen. He was the only person in the entire world who had looked past the chaos, looked past the scandal, and simply noticed my tears. And as I held his warm silk handkerchief against my chest, the icy despair in my heart began, just a fraction, to thaw. The weeks that followed the disaster at the altar did not blend into a whirlwind of glamorous dates or expensive gifts. Kongdae didn't try to sweep me into his penthouse or smother me with his billions. Instead, he offered me something far rarer in a city that had always demanded I earn my right to breathe. He gave me space, safety, and an uncanny, quiet consistency. I refused to give up my life. I went right back to work at the bustling cafe in Hongdae, pouring espresso shots with blistered fingers and managing freelance ledger sheets late into the night. I expected the scandal of being dumped at the altar to ruin me. But strangely, the harsh whispers of the neighborhood died down. What I didn't realize at first was that Kongdae's influence was acting like a silent buffer around my world. He didn't order me to quit my jobs. He knew my independence was a fierce protective shield I wasn't ready to drop. Instead, he adjusted the world around me to make it kinder. Every single morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., a sleek black town car would pull up to the curb outside my tiny, cramped apartment. The driver wouldn't say a word. He would simply open the door, shielding me from the biting soul wind. At the cafe, a sudden influx of corporate orders began to flood in. Every morning, a quiet man in a dark suit would walk in and purchase the cafe's entire inventory of pastries and premium roasts on behalf of Kang Holdings, leaving the shop entirely empty by 9 a.m. "You look exhausted, Olivia C., my manager said one Tuesday, looking at the empty display cases. "Go home. We are sold out for the day, and your full day's wage is already covered." I knew exactly who was behind it. When I confronted Kongdae that evening at a quiet, unassuming noodle shop he had booked out entirely, just so we could talk without prying eyes, I slammed my apron onto the table. "I don't need your charity, Kongdae," I said, my voice tight, though my chest ached with fatigue. "I've taken care of myself my whole life. I don't need a billionaire playing fairy godfather because he pities the poor black girl." Kongdae didn't get angry. He didn't use his imposing height to intimidate me. He quietly broke apart a pair of wooden chopsticks and set them neatly beside my bowl. He looked at me, his dark, deep eyes reflecting the dim, warm lantern light of the restaurant. "It is not charity, Olivia," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm against my frayed nerves. "And it is certainly not pity. I watch you fight every single day. You fight the ghost of your father's debts, you fight the prejudice of this city, and you fight your own exhaustion. Real strength does not mean refusing a hand when the hill is steep. I am simply buying your time back from the world, so you have a moment to breathe." There was no control in his tone, No demand for a return on his investment. He was protecting me, but he was leaving the reins of my life firmly in my own hands. As the days bled into weeks, our connection grew not from grand romantic gestures, but from these quiet, grounded conversations. We sat in that little restaurant for hours, stripping away the armor we both wore so heavily. I told him about growing up in Atlanta, about the rich warmth of my mother's cooking, and the agonizing pain of losing my parents so young. I told him how hard it was to navigate a country where I stood out so visually, yet felt so profoundly invisible. In return, the feared Mafia boss showed me glimpses of the boy beneath the scars. He spoke of the suffocating weight of taking over his family's legacy, a world where a single moment of vulnerability could mean death. In my world, everyone wants something from me, Kongdae murmured one night, his fingers brushing against the rim of his teacup. They want my protection, my money, or my blood. But when I sit here with you, Olivia, you look at me as if I am just a man. Not a boss, not a billionaire, just a man. That's because I don't care about your money, Kongdae, I said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through my lips. He laughed a rare, deep sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made my stomach do a dangerous little flip. I know. That is what makes you the most terrifying person I have ever encountered. We shared laughter in those quiet hours, a sweet, unexpected medicine that began to heal the jagged wounds Ji-hoon had left behind. I found myself looking forward to the sound of his car, to the grounding presence of his calm demeanor. I was falling in love with the safety he provided, with the way he listened to me as if my words were the only things that mattered in all of Seoul. One rainy evening, as we walked down a narrow alleyway near my apartment, a reckless delivery scooter came barreling around the corner, losing control on the slick asphalt and skidding directly toward me. Before I could even gasp, Kongdae's reflexes kicked in. He didn't yell, and he didn't reach for the weapon I knew he carried beneath his tailored jacket. With a fluid, powerful motion, he stepped directly in front of me, wrapping a strong arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his chest. He took the brunt of the impact as the heavy metal crate of the scooter clipped his shoulder, sending the driver sliding into the wall. The alley went dead silent, except for the sound of the pouring rain. Kongdae didn't even look back at the driver. His grip on me tightened, his breath hot against my forehead as he held me tightly against his racing heart. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice laced with a raw, fierce panic I had never heard from him before. His hands cupped my face, his dark eyes frantically scanning my skin, searching for any sign of pain. I'm fine, I breathed, my hands resting against his damp lapels. My heart was pounding, not from the scooter, but from the overwhelming sensation of being completely shielded. For the first time in my life, someone had stood between me and the storm. He had willingly taken a blow meant for me, without hesitation, without calculation. The space between us felt electric, charged with a sudden, undeniable gravity. The rain dripped from the tips of his black hair, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. As I looked up into his eyes, wrapped securely in his arms, the rest of the city faded away. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I wasn't alone. I was exactly where I was meant to be, protected by a man who made me feel like I was worth everything. I leaned into his touch, my heart whispering a terrifying, beautiful truth. I was falling for him. But just as the warmth of his lips began to descend toward mine, a sharp chime broke the silence. The delivery driver had scrambled away, but a phone had slipped from his pocket onto the wet pavement, its screen flashing brightly with an incoming text notification. My eyes instinctively darted to the glowing screen on the ground, and the breath caught completely in my throat. The notification displayed a banking alert from a prominent Swiss account, and the name attached to the sender's details was a name I would recognize anywhere. Ji-hoon. The rain felt suddenly freezing as it pelted against my skin. The glowing phone screen on the wet asphalt seemed to burn a hole straight through my reality. Ji-hoon. The name stared back at me, a ghost from a past I thought I was burying. I gently pushed myself out of Kongdae's embrace, my hands trembling as I knelt down to pick up the device. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear. It wasn't just a text. It was an automated transaction receipt from a private Swiss bank, documenting a staggeringly massive wire transfer. $10 million. And the originating account name printed directly beneath the sum belonged to a subsidiary of Kang Holdings. My lungs seized. The world around me tilted. The cozy, safe bubble Kang Dae had built for me over the last month popping instantly into a cold, harsh vacuum. I stood up slowly, the rain washing over my face, mixing with the sudden prickle of hot tears. I held the phone out toward him, the screen illuminating the stark contrast of our skin in the dim alleyway. Kang Dae, my voice was barely a whisper, fighting against the tightness in my throat. What is this? Why does your company name have a transaction record to my ex-fiancé for $10 million, dated the exact morning of my wedding? Kang Dae didn't move. He stood perfectly still under the downpour, his sharp features carving a silhouette of absolute calm against the shadows. But I noticed the slight clenching of his jaw, the subtle hardening of his dark eyes. He didn't look surprised. He looked caught. "Olivia," he said, his voice dropping into that deep, authoritative register. But this time it didn't soothe me. It terrified me. "Put the phone down. Let us go inside where it is warm, and I will explain." "No. Explain it right here." I yelled, the raw pain of my alter abandonment flaring back to life with a vengeance. The beautiful black woman he claimed to see, the independent woman he claimed to respect, was I just a pawn to him? You paid him. You were the one who gave him the money to leave me. You bought my humiliation. Kang Dae took a step toward me, his hands raised slightly in a placating gesture, completely ignoring the rain soaking through his expensive charcoal suit. "I did not buy your humiliation, Olivia. I bought your freedom." "My freedom?" I scoffed, a bitter, broken laugh ripping from my chest. "You ruined my life. I loved him. I sacrificed 3 years of my life, endured his family's casual racism, worked myself to the bone to be enough for him. And you stepped in with your Mafia money and played God. You took away the only man who ever chose me. He did not choose you." Kang Dae's voice cracked through the alleyway like thunder, losing its signature composure for the very first time. His eyes blazed with a fierce, protective fury that made me take a step back. He closed the distance between us, his hands gently but firmly gripping my upper arms, forcing me to look at him. "If a man truly chooses you, Olivia, there is no amount of money on this earth that can make him walk away." I did not force a ring off his finger. I offered a greedy, pathetic boy a choice. I gave him a number to see what his loyalty was worth, and he took it. He signed you away in less than 5 minutes. I did not destroy your future, Olivia. I merely showed you the foundation of sand you were trying to build it on. I stared at him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow, but the betrayal still stung. He had orchestrated the most humiliating day of my life behind my back. He had manipulated my destiny from the shadows, watching me cry on that altar knowing he held the strings. How could I ever trust a man who operated with such terrifying, absolute control? Before I could pull away from his grip, the sound of heavy footsteps splashing through the puddles echoed from the main street. "Olivia. Olivia, please." A frantic, desperate voice called out. I stiffened. I knew that voice. I turned my head toward the mouth of the alley, and my heart stopped. Ji-hoon was running toward us. But he didn't look like the pristine, wealthy heir I remembered. His expensive clothes were rumpled, his hair was messy, and a dark, purplish bruise marred his left cheekbone. He looked terrified, casting frantic glances behind him as if he were being hunted. When he saw me, a look of pathetic relief washed over his face. "Olivia. Thank God I found you," he panted, stopping a few feet away, his eyes darting fearfully to Kang Dae, who immediately shifted his body to shield me, his hand moving instinctively toward the inside of his jacket. "Ji-hoon?" I stammered, my mind spinning into complete chaos. "What are you doing here?" "You left the country." "I had to. I didn't have a choice." Ji-hoon cried, his hands shaking as he pointed a finger at Kang Dae. "Olivia, don't listen to anything he says. He's a monster. He's the head of the Kang syndicate." His men cornered me the morning of the wedding. They threatened my family's business, they beat me, and they forced me to take that money and sign a contract to disappear. He wanted you for himself, Olivia. He used his power to tear us apart because he knew a poor expat girl like you would have no choice but to turn to him for protection. Ji-hoon took a step closer, his eyes pleading, filled with tears. I came back for you. I hid from his men just to find you. I still love you, Olivia. Come with me. We can take his money, leave Korea, and start over. Don't let this criminal control you. My head pounded with a deafening ache. I looked at Ji-hoon, the man I had loved for 3 years, who was now offering me a way out, painting a picture of a terrifying conspiracy. Then I looked at Kang Dae, the dangerous mafia boss who stood rigidly beside me, his face a mask of cold, lethal stone, waiting to see who I would believe. Every scene, every revelation was answering one question while opening a locker of 100 more. Who was the real predator in my life? The man who left, or the man who stayed? The rain continued to fall in heavy, relentless sheets, washing over the three of us as the alleyway became a stage for a truth that was about to rip my world apart. Ji-hoon stood a few feet away, panting, looking like a desperate victim, while Kang Dae stood right beside me, a towering wall of silent, dangerous composure. Choose, Olivia, Ji-hoon begged, stretching his hand out toward me, his voice cracking with artificial emotion. He is a mafia boss. He bought me off to isolate you. Look at him. He handles people like property. Come with me. We can take the $10 million he forced on me, leave this country, and finally have the life we planned. I stared at Ji-hoon's outstretched hand. For 3 years, I would have given anything to see him reach for me like that. But looking at him now, noticing the frantic greed hidden beneath the fear in his eyes, something felt entirely wrong. I turned my head slowly to look at Kang Dae. The feared mafia boss didn't reach out to grab me. He didn't order his men, who were now quietly stepping into the alley mouth, to eliminate the nuisance. He simply kept his hands at his sides, his dark eyes locked onto mine. There was a profound, aching sorrow hidden behind his lethal mask. Is it true, Kang Dae? I whispered, the rain catching on my eyelashes. Did you threaten his family? Did you force him into this? Kang Dae let out a slow, heavy breath, the steam rising into the cold air. My men did corner him, Olivia. That part is true. But I did not force him to do anything. I gave him an option. And he is lying about why. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Kang Dae reached into his breast pocket. Ji-hoon flinched, stepping back as if expecting a gun. But Kang Dae pulled out a thick, waterproof leather folder. He didn't hand it to me. He opened it, shielding the documents from the downpour with his own body, and held it up so I could see the contents under the dim light of the alley lamp. Inside were legal contracts, land deeds, and old medical files. Look at the dates, Olivia, Kang Dae said, his deep voice carrying a strange, haunting resonance that cut through the sound of the rain. My eyes scanned the top document. It was a medical ledger from a prestigious private hospital in Seoul, dated 5 years ago. It detailed a series of incredibly expensive, highly experimental cellular treatments for terminal lung cancer. The patient's name was written in bold ink, Marcus Vance. My father. My breath caught in my throat, a physical shock rippling through my chest. This can't be. My father's treatments were covered by an anonymous medical grant from an international foundation. The doctors told us it was a miracle. It gave him 2 more years of life, 2 years I got to spend saying goodbye to him. There are no miracles in corporate medicine, Olivia, Kang Dae murmured softly, his gaze softening as he looked at my stunned face. There is only currency. The foundation that paid those bills was a shell company owned entirely by the Kong Corporation. I paid for your father's life. Why? I stammered, my head spinning, the rain feeling warmer, almost suffocating. You didn't even know me 5 years ago. I was still in America. But I knew your father, Kang Dae said. Taking a step closer, his presence enveloping me, shielding me from Ji-hoon's frantic protests. 10 years ago, Before I took over my family's syndicate, I was a reckless, arrogant heir trying to prove my strength on the docks of Savannah, Georgia. I was ambushed by a rival faction. I was bleeding out in a dark alley, not unlike this one. Your father, Marcus, was working the night shift as a cargo supervisor. He didn't know who I was. He didn't care that I looked dangerous. He hid me in his truck, drove me to a safe house, and patched my wounds. He saved my life. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. My father, a man of quiet integrity, had never spoken about his time working the docks, other than saying he once helped a young man out of a bad situation. I promised him I would repay the debt, Kong Dae continued, his voice tight with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. When he fell ill years later, I tracked him down and ensured he had the best care money could buy. Before he passed, he called me. He didn't ask for money for himself. He told me he was leaving behind a beautiful, fierce, independent daughter who was stubborn enough to carry his debts on her own back. He asked me to watch over you. He asked me to ensure that the world didn't crush your spirit. I covered my mouth with my hand, hot tears spilling over my fingers. The man I had feared, the man I thought was a predatory stranger manipulating my life, had been my guardian angel in the shadows for half a decade. When you came to Seoul, I respected your independence, Kong Dae said, casting a lethal, freezing glare back at Ji-hoon. I watched from afar as you worked 2 jobs. But then you met him. And I had my men investigate his family. Look at the second document, Olivia. I looked down at the paper beneath the medical file. It was a legally binding contract drafted by Ji-hoon's family corporation. It was an agreement to sell off the remaining plots of land my father owned in America Land that sat on a newly discovered natural gas reserve to a rival syndicate in Seoul. The date on the contract was set for the day after our wedding. Ji-hoon didn't love you, Olivia, Kong Dae revealed, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. He found out about your father's land assets through an illegal data leak. He targeted you, he courted you, and his family publicly humiliated you to keep your self-esteem so low that you would never question why he was rushing you into a marriage contract that signed over your inheritance to his family name. The night before your wedding, he finalized the deal to strip you of everything your father left you, intending to divorce you or dump you in an expat shelter a month later. The truth shattered the last remnants of my old life. I looked across the alley at Ji-hoon. His face had gone completely pale. The desperate lover routine evaporated, replaced by the ugly, trembling sneer of a caught thief. I gave him a choice the morning of the wedding, Kong Dae said, turning fully toward Ji-hoon. I offered him $10 million from my own pocket, more than the land was worth, on the condition that he sign over the land back to you and show you his true colors by abandoning the altar. If he truly loved you, if he wanted to protect you from a criminal like me, he would have fought. He would have called the police. He would have stood by your side. But he didn't. He took the check in 5 seconds, smiled, and packed his bags. The real reveal wasn't just that Kong Dae was a mafia boss. The real reveal was that the person I thought was destroying my future was the only person who had spent years silently, fiercely protecting my past, my dignity, and my father's legacy. The man I thought loved me was the predator. The man I feared was my sanctuary. The silence that followed the revelation was heavier than the storm crashing around us. The leather folder in Kong Dae's hand closed with a quiet, definitive thud, but the echoes of what he had just unveiled rumbled through my chest like thunder. I stood paralyzed at the center of the alleyway, the rain soaking through my clothes, freezing me to the bone. Yet, inside, a volatile fire was burning. I looked at the 2 men standing before me, 2 completely opposing forces, who had carved up my life, my destiny, and my heart without my permission. On one side stood Ji-hoon. He had backed up against the damp brick wall, his hands still trembling, his eyes darting frantically between me and the dark figures of Kong Dae's men blocking the only exit to the street. The mask of the heartbroken, desperate fiancé had slipped entirely, revealing the hollow, panicked shell of a man who had gambled his morality and lost. On the other side stood Kong Dae. He didn't move an inch toward me. He didn't use his towering height, his immense wealth, or the lethal power of the syndicate at his back to force my hand. He stood under the downpour, a dangerous billionaire, a feared mafia boss, entirely exposed to whatever judgment I was about to pass. He had laid bare his secrets, his history with my father, and his unorthodox protection. He was giving me the one thing I had never truly had in this city: total, absolute autonomy. "Olivia," Ji-hoon croaked, his voice cracking as he tried one last, desperate gamble. "You can't believe him. He's a criminal. He manipulates data, he manufactures documents. Even if the contract is real, my family forced me into it. We were in debt. I did it for us, so we could have a future. $10 million is ours now. Olivia, think about what we can do with that. We can leave Seoul. We can go back to America. You'll never have to work a day in your life again. Please, look at what we built together for 3 years." I looked at Ji-hoon's outstretched hand, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I had loved. I saw a stranger. I saw a boy who looked at a beautiful black woman and saw a target. An easy mark. Someone whose vulnerability and isolation in a foreign country could be weaponized for profit. He thought my price tag was $10 million. He thought my dignity could be bought, paid for, and traded away. Then I looked at Kong Dae. "You kept this from me," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling of my jaw. I stepped closer to him, looking up into his dark, piercing eyes. "You watched me break down on that altar. You watched me cry for weeks. You let me believe I wasn't enough, knowing exactly what he had done." "I wanted you to see him for who he was, Olivia," Kong Dae replied, his deep baritone laced with a rare, raw vulnerability. "If I had simply walked up to you before the wedding and told you he was a liar, you would have hated me. You would have defended him. You would have stayed trapped in a cycle of trying to prove your worth to a family that never intended to give it to you. I needed you to see his choice. But I engineered a cruel theater to do it. For the pain I caused you while you waited in that church, I am deeply sorry. If you choose to walk away from me right now, I will not stop you. Your father's land is legally restored to your name. You are free. The strongest romances are not built on attraction, nor are they built on the intoxicating thrill of danger. They are built on choices." The question hammering in my chest wasn't whether I was attracted to Kong Dae, or whether his immense wealth could solve my immediate problems. The question was much deeper, much more terrifying. Will I choose to trust a man who operates in the shadows, but who has spent 5 years proving that he values my soul more than his own comfort? Will I choose the courage to step into the unknown with a man who sees me, or will I choose the familiar, comfortable lie of my past? I took a deep, shuddering breath, letting the rain wash away the last remnants of the girl who thought she had to work herself to death, just to be tolerated. I turned my back on Ji-hoon. "You can keep the money, Ji-hoon," I said, my voice echoing off the brick walls with a newfound, fierce authority. "Take the $10 million. Consider it the price of your absence. But if you ever look for me, if you ever step foot near my family's land, or if you ever utter my name again, you won't just be dealing with a broken bride. You'll be dealing with the woman who knows exactly what you are." Ji-hoon's jaw dropped. He looked at me, then at Kong Dae, realizing that his power over me had vanished completely. With a terrified glance at the guards, he turned and scrambled down the opposite end of the alleyway, disappearing into the dark, rainy night like a ghost exposed to the light. I turned back to Kong Dae. He was watching me, his chest rising and falling slowly, a quiet intensity in his eyes that made my pulse race. "You paid $10 million to test a coward," I whispered, walking up to him until there were only inches between us. I reached out, my brown fingers resting against the damp charcoal fabric of his lapel. "How much are you willing to pay to keep the woman he abandoned?" A slow, breathtaking smile broke across Kong Dae's face, the first genuine, unburdened smile I had ever seen from him. He reached up, his large, warm hand cupping the side of my face, his thumb gently wiping away a stray raindrop from my cheek. "Everything I own, Olivia," he murmured, his voice a fierce, devotional vow against the storm. and it still would not be enough to equal your value. In that dark, drenched alleyway, I made my choice. I didn't choose him because he was a powerful billionaire or a feared mafia boss. I chose him because, in a world that had spent a lifetime telling me I was too invisible or too poor to matter, he was the only man who looked at my heart, looked at my strength, and decided it was worth fighting for. I leaned into his touch, choosing trust, choosing courage, and finally choosing myself.